Even though it's like everyone's favorite show. Like, the plot's so good. Like, it's really long, though.
Oh, wow, we got the sun back. Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you all. All right, who do we have up there for Hispanic Heritage Month? This will be my last one because she's the last one I found. And I think we're drawing to a close on Hispanic Heritage Month anyways. But this is Mother Dominga, or as she's also known, Maria Belén Guzmán Florit. As you can tell, she's a nun, or was a nun, and she is from Puerto Rico. And American citizen. She was born in 1897 and she died in 1993. And she joined the Dominican Sisters, the Order of Preachers. They're called the Order of Preachers for the men, but for they were founded by a Spaniard named Dominic Guzman, no relation. At least I don't believe a relation, maybe a long-lost relation for Sister Guzman Florit. But anyways, back in the Middle Ages in the I think it was the 1200s, or was it the late 1100s? No, I think it was the early 1200s that Dominic founded his order. But an order of men, and also it's established an order of women. So she joined the Order of Women, and later she founded her own group of sisters, the Dominican Sisters of Fatima, I believe in Puerto Rico. She was known, I couldn't find a lot of information about her, but what little information I did find, she apparently was a great servant of the poor. So that was one of her ministries, was to serve the poor. And this is a picture of her later in life. She's praying the rosary. And there is a medical tie-in because apparently she's receiving intravenous fluids. I don't know why. Maybe she was dehydrated or something, but she was being treated medically by somebody. And this is a page, who is Quien fue Madre Dominga? Who is Mother Dominga? I guess Dominga or Dominica was her name in religious life. So, Mother Dominga, please pray for us. Servant of God. I should have said that. She's a servant of God, so she's at the lowest level. So who knows? Her order might try to push her up, promote her cause for sainthood. But she apparently was a very holy woman, and I ask for Mother Dominga's prayers for us. Okay. To Ms. Mitchell. Okay, so we're just missing Mr. Saravo. Hopefully he'll show up. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Oh, please remember that next week is the fall break, so we don't have class on Tuesday. So don't come to class, because I won't be here. You know what I'm saying? Any day to take a break, I'll take it, baby, Anyways, and also, I know I looked at the syllabus, and I know that I'm going, it used to be that I never thought I would have enough to talk about, and I'd always go over, and I'd always be playing catch up. But in this case, I don't know why with this course, I'm going faster than usual. So I know on the syllabus, I should still be talking about sources of authority for this class and the next class, but I'm moving on to another topic. But I'll fill in. I have some videos to show and we can discuss, so I will try to fill in the time. But just keep following the syllabus with the readings and whatnot. Just follow what the syllabus says for the date that it says. So if it says that there's certain readings to be done by today's date, then just have them done. Okay? Don't follow me because I'm a little bit skewed and off. As I told you, usually I talk too much, and apparently I've been going too fast. Oh, and this is something I did also want to mention. This course has a lot of unfamiliar information. Okay, we're dealing with bioethics, but we're dealing with bioethics from a Judeo-Christian perspective. Okay, so you're kind of getting hit from both sides. You're getting sometimes medical information, or you're getting healthcare information, but you're also getting a lot of religious information. And you're also actually getting hit from a third side, because you're also getting ethical information, because I'm throwing in certain philosophical systems and ethical systems that people use to make decisions in the healthcare field. So I can understand that it's overwhelming. So first of all, if I'm talking too fast and going too fast, it's okay to slow me down and to stop me and ask me questions. Say, Dr. Dunn, I don't understand what you're saying. Could you please repeat that? Or could you explain it a different way? Okay? because I don't want anyone to be lost. This might be especially true with the religious information, because even, I think I said this at the beginning of the course, even if you've come from a Catholic background, like Catholic school, a lot of this religious information, and this would be especially true if you don't have a religious background, is going to be very unfamiliar. The church and religion has its own kind of technicalities and technical terms that, I just have to teach you because you have to understand what I'm talking about. I can't assume that you know what I'm talking about. So those are thrown out there. So don't be, if you're overwhelmed, let me know. And also let me know in class. If you're feeling overwhelmed by the information, ask me to stop and explain more, explain better so that everyone can understand, okay? All right, I just thought I would mention that because I think it might be a concern. Putting away Mother Dominga. Yes, going to this. Okay. Catholic bioethics, talking about normative principles. That's the next section. I'm going to talk about normative principles for Catholic bioethics. Oh, Mr. Cyril's here. Okay. I'll get you before I forget. Okay. Okay, when we're talking about normative principles, or where do we want to look for what are the normative principles for a Catholic vision of healthcare or bioethics? Well, we've already talked about some principles already. We talked about Jesus of Nazareth as the essential standard for the Catholic ethical vision. We've talked about some of the principles that Jesus taught about unrestricted love and mercy for all people, but especially the greatest commandment of love of God and love of neighbor. And these are kind of like the bedrock things that animate everything the Catholic Church does, but not just Catholic healthcare and how it looks, its ethical vision of how to treat the sick and the suffering. But how do how does the rubber hit the road here? How do these come into play in actual practice? And so you have the Catholic Church has come up with documents. In this case, the normative document that we'll be dealing with for our context, which is the USA, the United States, comes from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, which a conference is just a grouping of all the bishops of the United States who come together for common cause. Common cause, and sometimes they issue statements on matters of interest to them that are of interest to the national Catholic Church. I mean, each bishop has his own area that he has control over, called a diocese, which if you're curious what it's called a diocese. And if it's a really big diocese, it's called an archdiocese. So, for example, Gwynedd Mercy is part of the Archdiocese of Philadelphia under the Archbishop of Philadelphia. I forget who it is right now. I know it was Chaput, but he retired. I forget who was put in his place. Oh, well. I should know. Shame on me. Oh, well. Anyways. So they put out statements, and they also sometimes they're national statements that bishops will then implement in their own dioceses, their own areas of control where they have religious control. And this is a statement. If we want to look for normative principles of Catholic healthcare, we look to the ethical and religious directives for Catholic healthcare services. The most recent edition is the 6th edition, which came out was approved in 2018. And it's oftentimes simply referred to as the ERD for shorthand way of referring to ethical and religious directives, ERD. And it is the controlling document for Catholic healthcare within the dioceses of the United States of America that are under the control of the Catholic bishops. Other countries would have their own directives where they're putting Catholic principles into practice. So the Canadian Catholic Conference would have their own, the German Catholic Conference, the Zambian Catholic Conference in Africa, they would have their own directives as well, which, they wouldn't necessarily be different, but they would need to be contextualized for each nation, for each region of the world. This is our region. This is our region of the world, so this is what would be used. I want to say something else about that. Oh well. Oh, that's what I wanted to say. It is the 6th edition, but I believe they're in the process of putting out a 7th edition. I don't believe it's come out yet, but the Catholic bishops recently had their national meeting, I think a couple months ago, and so they're in the process of renewing the directives as new things have come up, because one of the major topics of discussion in regards to the ERD was it doesn't address gender-affirming treatments and gender-affirming medical treatments and surgical treatments, and how do those fit into a Catholic ethic of the human person. So that has to be brought, the 6th edition has to kind of like be brought up to date in regards to the new technologies that are and new issues that have come up in the last several years since 2018 that were maybe not so prominent back then. So there's a new edition coming out, but this is the current controlling edition, and it's to be implemented by the diocesan bishops in any Catholic healthcare institution under their care or supervision, which would be within their diocese. So if a bishop has, a hospital or a nursing home or a hospice, they will come under the control of this. It would be his job to implement on that local level these directives, these overall directives. And the ERD is organized according to 6 themes. If you read it, the first theme is social responsibility, the responsibility that the church has to the society at large in what it's doing with its Catholic healthcare institutions. Secondly, there's a pastoral and spiritual responsibility because it is a religious institution, and there is a vision of the human person that sees the human person as both a material and a spiritual entity, and so that spiritual aspect has to be taken care of. The word pastoral comes from the Latin word for shepherd. Pastoral from shepherd. So shepherding or taking care of someone is just basically what pastoral means. It's the caring aspect of the caring aspect of the responsibility that you are showing concerning care for the person. It's pastoral. It's just a more religious term, I guess you could say, for care and concern. Third is the relationship between the healthcare professional and the patient. So that would be doctor-patient relationship, and how does that work in a Catholic healthcare setting? What are the values that should be present there? Care at the beginning of life. And so this would be maternal care, care of the mother, care of the child. What's the position of the church on assistive reproductive technologies, ARTs, things like in vitro fertilization or stuff like that. Care at the end of life, so taking care of people when they're in the dying process, or maybe someone has died, or someone is in, a person has died, and do you keep them still alive? That's, questions of like keeping people on a respirator who have brain death, and those ethical issues will come up there. Caring for people at the end of life. And then finally, the formation of healthcare alliances, because no one can do everything all alone. Healthcare is a massive project, and so what are the principles that Catholic healthcare institutions have to show if and when they make covenants or agreements with non-Catholic healthcare institutions? Because there are things that a Catholic healthcare institution can do or does do, but also things that it does not do that have to be spelled out in any such agreements. This abortion would be a big issue, or sterilization services. If you're coming in, you want to make an agreement with a secular hospital where they do these things, there would have to be an understanding about what the position of the Catholic position is, and understanding of why those things are not permissible, or in what circumstances they might be permissible. Never in the case of direct abortion, but in the case of sterilization, there are certain cases where it might be an indirect thing that's tolerated for another purpose. But that has to be spelled out. So they address the formation of healthcare alliances with non-Catholic institutions. According to Margaret Hogan, who is a professor of ethics at the University of Portland, The ERD is an example of interacting with and trying to transform the contemporary world. One could also say it's a way of the church extending the kingdom of God into the world through healthcare. And the ERD is meant to guide the Catholic community about what is appropriate healthcare with the Catholic vision. According to the ERD, a Catholic institutional healthcare service is what? It is a community that provides healthcare to those in need of it, which would seem to be, tautology, as they say, something that's kind of self-evident, that you're providing healthcare to those in need of it, because who else would you provide healthcare to? Those who aren't needed, you don't need healthcare, get in here. You grab them and come on in. Hook them up to the machines, nurse. Whether you need it or not, we're going to give it to you. Take his blood pressure. Check his weight. But the service must be animated by the gospel of Jesus Christ and guided by the moral tradition of the church. So here you have the two sources of authority in evidence here. You have the gospel, the sacred scriptures, the sacred writings about Jesus, sacred scripture, and you also have the moral tradition, sacred tradition, the moral teachings, the ethical teachings that have been passed down about how to properly treat a human person. That's really what it's all about. It's not about do's and don'ts, rules and stuff like that. I mean, there are rules, but it's a vision of the human person that the church has, that it's kind of actuating, making active by doing and not doing certain things. It's not because it's meant trying to be difficult, like saying, okay, no, we won't do that. Like the church is trying to be difficult about issues, but it can't do it because it believes that there are certain things that injure the very dignity of the human person, or what a human person is supposed to be. In this case, a person who is in need of healing. Recall that in his ministry and teaching and healing, Jesus emphasized the unrestricted love and mercy of God. So these are motivating factors. This is done out of, sometimes they'll use the word charity. So you have in groups like Catholic Charities and stuff like that. But charity is the Latin, it comes from the Latin word, which basically means love. And it's not a physical, sexual love. It's not an erotic love. It's basically not even disinterested, because it is kind of passionate. You could say a passionate care for the other person, a concern for the other person, both friend and foe, for their good, because hate is the opposite. When you hate something or hate someone, you don't want their good. You want them to be destroyed. You want them to go away. But love is the opposite of that. Love is a passionate feeling of care and concern, that you want the good of the other person, even if that person doesn't return that love. So the central commandment is, again, the greatest command of love of God and love of neighbor. This is what motivates Catholic healthcare, and this is the principle that's underlying these directives. As we showed from the parable of the Good Samaritan, love of neighbor is expressed through mercy. Jesus says in answer to the lawyer who asked him the question, well, who's my neighbor? And Jesus says, well, who was neighbor to the man who was the Jewish man who was beaten up? And it was his enemy, supposedly, or a person who was not seen as a friend of the Jews. It was the Samaritan. And the lawyer says, doesn't even say it's the Samaritan. He won't even say that. He says, well, the one who treated the guy with mercy. He kind of gets around it that way. And Jesus says, go and do likewise. Aha. Go and do likewise. Mercy. So Catholic healthcare is an expression of this merciful love for neighbor. How? This is from the ERD, and there'll be a lot of quotes from the ERD as I'm going over it, so just get used to it. You're going to hear a lot from the ERD in the next couple lectures. Their embrace of Christ's healing mission, meaning the churches, I guess you could say, or Catholic healthcare professionals of Christ's healing mission, has led institutionally based Catholic healthcare services in the United States to become an integral part of the nation's healthcare system. I forget, I think in the book that we're reading, Kane's book, I I think it gives a statistic. I seem to remember it somewhere that 13%, I think, of the healthcare system is Catholic healthcare system, is Catholic-run institutions. So there's a significant chunk, a significant portion of our nation's healthcare system that is motivated by the Catholic, or comes from the Catholic Church and is motivated by Catholic healthcare principles. Today, this complex healthcare system confronts a range of economic, technological, social, and moral challenges. And it's not just about moral challenges like, will the Catholic Church, can I get a condom at a Catholic hospital or something like that? But there are all sorts of technological challenges. A Catholic hospital has to deal with the issue of AI no less than others. I mean, issues of justice and the treatment, how you treat your employees, the people who work there, the doctors, the nurses. We talked about AI last time and artificial intelligence. Our Catholic hospital is going to use artificial intelligence to the detriment of their employees by laying people off because you don't need them anymore. You don't need radiologists to read the film anymore because the AI, you can put it into an AI machine and it will read it just fine, even better maybe. Do you need doctors or physicians as much anymore? I think you'll always need nurses because you'll always need that level of direct care that nurses give. I don't think AI could substitute for that necessarily, unless they do develop robots that can walk around and can go and do stuff. But they are trying to develop, I've seen them on television, robots that can move around the emergency room or move around the room and dispense drugs, the proper medications and stuff like that. You could have them go into the room with a person and stuff like that. It sounds like science fiction, but I've seen these things on television, so it's possible people are thinking of these things. How could you have a machine do the job of what a nurse maybe does, giving people their medications, certain basic things like giving people their medications and stuff like that. So through technological, and of course there are economic challenges. Skyrocketing prices, the price of medications, the price that one has to charge for healthcare. I mean, a Catholic institution is, as we'll see, is supposed to be serving the poor and serving the marginalized. That's one of the primary or a major focus. Well, how do you do that? Because the poor usually can't pay, or people who are uninsured or underinsured. So these are all challenges, and the response of Catholic healthcare institutions and services to these challenges is guided by these normative principles that inform the Church's healing ministry. Okay, what are these normative principles? First, human dignity and the sacredness of life is the first principle. Second principle is care for the poor. Thirdly, the common good. Fourth is stewardship. And then bringing up the rear, number 5 is the magisterium. Can never get away from the magisterium. It's always lurking, lurking, lurking. Start out with human dignity and the sacredness of life. This is the first principle, the primary principle. As the ERD says, Catholic healthcare ministry is rooted in a commitment to promote and defend human dignity. This is the foundation of its concern to respect the sacredness of every human life from the moment of conception until death. The first right of the human person, the right to life, entails a right to the means for the proper development of life, such as adequate health care. Okay, that last bit is an interesting statement. Okay, so this is the foundational point of view of Catholic healthcare, the concern for the value that the human life is valuable. That's why we do healing. Okay, we could say all life is valuable. I mean, that's not to discount veterinarians and what they do. We don't want to see things suffering. So, of course, we have animal hospitals, which are not exactly the same, but we do the same thing with animals that we care about. But human beings are on a different level. A human hospital, we respect human life and see a value in human life that is different. Okay, even though there's a respect for all living things, and we don't want to see anything suffer, human suffering seems to be of a different level and a different nature. And human life is holy, it is sacred, it is sanctified, it is this, which is kind of a religious way of saying that it's special. It's special. And again, that's not to discount that there's other animal life in the world and other forms of life, some of which also feel pain and suffer, and not that they should suffer, but that there's the belief that there's a special value to human life. And I don't think you need to even be a religious person to see that. I mean, that's why we found hospitals. You don't need to be a religious person to see the value of a hospital, or why there should be a special place just for humans, just for the care of humans, and why we invest so much money and time and effort into research, into trying to heal human diseases. The last point I think is interesting, because this first right of the human person of being alive, of existing, ties into that we should have a right to the development of our life. It's not enough that we're just alive and we're in existence. Okay, that's not enough for human life. Human life is meant to flourish, to grow, and to be well. And so to do that, you need adequate health care. So does that also mean, how does that tie into the right to health care? Does that also tie in, does that extend to there is a right to health care that maybe the government or maybe society owes to the person? And we'll talk about that later as we get on. Because yes, the Catholic Church does think there's a basic right to health care, and it's based on this belief in the goodness of human life, the dignity of human life. Dignity comes from the Latin dignus, which means to be worthy, deserving, suitable, fitting, and that's basically what it means in its definition. Something, the quality of being valued or honored. There is something special about something. It has a dignity to it. It has a special quality that is honored. So you treat it in certain ways. And we do this with things as well, not just persons. I mean, think about how we treat special things. I mean, if you go to a Taylor Swift concert and she throws a hanky out to you in the crowd, get it. Before it goes up on eBay, which eventually it might go up on eBay for a few $1,000s, it has a dignity, even though it's a thing. Why? Because she touched it. It's got her DNA on it, Then I'll put it up on eBay. Then the money will more than compensate me for the dignity of that little handkerchief she throws out into the crowd. But but we do this with things. But human life is even more valuable, more dignified, and we see that in how we treat ourselves. Anyone who deals with, say, mental counseling or deals in mental illness. People who are going to do social work and stuff like that, you'll take courses in counseling and mental illness and stuff like that. But things like self-care, when the person got up in the morning, did he or she wash himself or herself? Did they brush their teeth? Did they comb their hair? Did they, just little things that you might do without thinking about it. But the fact that you might splash some cologne or perfume on yourself, or well, anyways, I don't do that, but I know people who do. So you smell nice. You put on some deodorant. You want to smell nice. You choose your clothes the way you choose them because you want to look nice. They make you feel good. That's all part of implicitly acknowledging your value and your worth as a human person. According to moral theologian William May, in his book Catholic Bioethics and the Gift of Human Life, the first dignity, the first value proper to human beings is the dignity that is theirs simply as living members of the human species. Now, there is a word called speciesism that has come into the English language in the last few decades, where you're not supposed to say that, mainly that there are philosophers and ethicists who will deny that there is a specifically human dignity, that our species is not necessarily or by definition any better than any other species. In fact, if you look at human history, you might say we're worse, than any species. The most damaging, but that's another conversation. That's another cup of coffee. But that is not a Catholic view. The primary dignity is to be a member of the human species, which God called into being when in the beginning, at the start of all creation, whenever that happened for human beings, he, quote, created mankind in his image, male and female, he created them. He's quoting from the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 27. Okay, so there is a religious motivation. I think you could make a philosophical argument for the value and dignity of a human person just based on our species, being rational beings and stuff like that, apart from a religious argument. But I think that the religious argument, at least the Christian argument, is a powerful one, that because without God, and it seems without God kind of behind it, why is the human being valuable? Why is a human being more valuable than the life of a dog or a single-celled organism, which are also alive and also suffer? And in the case of a dog, also has some sense of rationality. There's some kind of reason going on there. And dogs can think in some ways, some rudimentary ways. How would you argue for the value? Other than the fact that you just accept it, that that's just the way the world is. Here we are. We're the dominant species. And that's just reality. But because the human person was created in the image and likeness of God, he doesn't quote that part of it, but the image and likeness of God, that gives us an elevated dignity. We're more than just rational apes, or apes that learned how to think. There's something, we're in a relationship with the divine, with the ultimate reality. That on there. Man and woman are meant to be in God's image on earth. Okay, that God created mankind in his image. We're meant to be God's image, almost like God's physical representation on the planet, in a way. But also man is expected to be in God's likeness. Likeness, what does that mean? That is to be and act like God is and God does. So that's the primary dignity. But there's a secondary dignity that we could talk about, and that's the dignity that a human being gives himself or herself through freely choosing to shape your personhood, yourself, through choices and acts in accordance with the truth. The actions that we perform make us who we are in a way. Okay, it's kind of like with the virtues. The virtues are habits of action that, hopefully through practice. Now there's a question, do the virtues make you good, or do you practice them because you are good? That's a question. But nevertheless, they are habits, habitual ways of action that, if you practice them, they can make you a prudent person or a just person or a person who has courage to stick to your views and stuff like that, and stick to the moral life. So it's the same way with any action. They are creative for us. Actions are creative of who we are. It doesn't mean you're an evil person, but if you do enough evil actions, it kind of gives you a habit that's how you habitually do things, and how you look. If you lie all the time, or you don't tell the truth all the time, doesn't mean that you're awful, that God hates you, but it does mean that you've built up habits of behavior that are evil, that are not good for your human nature, that can distort your human nature. That can make you a person who is tending to lie all the time and not be a servant of the truth. That's just one example. It's not the only example. How the actions are creative because it follows from being an intelligent and a free being, that we have our intellect, we can think about our choices, and we're free to make our choices. And these choices are capable of through these choices, I should say, we're capable of determining our own life by our free choices, determining the kind of person we want to be. So we give ourselves this dignity by making good moral choices through true moral judgments. That's what we should be looking for, to make good moral choices through true moral judgments. Looking for a good choice, a good action in accordance with the truth. That's what we're looking for. And I think that's reasonable. I think that's what people are looking. You're looking to do, that's what we say when we talk about we're trying to do the right thing. Trying to do the correct thing, the thing that is ethically correct. But it's also in accordance with reality, the way the world really is. But we also give ourselves this dignity by being true to our natural dignity as persons created in God's image and likeness. I am special because God made me. That's from the religious point of view, the ultimate specialness of the human person. That no other creature, of course, God created everything. You say, well, God created all the animals and the rocks and the stones and the planets and the black holes and all that stuff as well. That's true. That's Catholic belief and Catholic teaching. But that the human person was created in a special way by God for a special purpose, that is to be in relationship with Him. And so we have this quotation from the Pastoral Constitution on the Church in the Modern World, also known as Gaudium et Spes. It's Vatican II. I mentioned Vatican II before. There was a council in the 1960s, held in Rome at St. Peter's Basilica, this big church in Rome, which is on Vatican Hill, hence it's called the Vatican. It's also its own country. It's the Vatican City-State, so it's the smallest country in the world, but it's its own country. Anyway, so it's the second council that was held there, an official meeting of bishops. So it's called Vatican II, the Second Vatican Council that was held in the 1960s. And it put out a bunch of documents, and I read to you from, I think it was the Dogmatic Constitution on Divine Revelation, when we talked about Scripture. And this is a pastoral constitution, a shepherding constitution. It deals with it's a constitution because it deals with things that are essential and constitutive of the Catholic faith. So whenever the church, it's just a technical term. It's a way to categorize documents, okay? It's, so just go with it. But I'm just explaining so that you know what it means. So because it deals with essential doctrines or beliefs of the Catholic Church, they call the document a constitution. If it dealt with laws or something, they might have called it a decree or a declaration or something like that. So they have different terminology for different documents. A constitution is at a high level of authority, and especially because it comes from a church council, an official meeting of bishops. It's a high level of authority. It's pastoral because its more its tone is pastoral. It didn't want to lay down teachings like this is what we believe this and you should believe that. It was more of a dialogue with the world, with the modern world. How does the church in the modern world, how does the church now look at the modern world? And kind of before Vatican II or the 1960s, the attitude of the church was kind of negative towards the modern world. It's kind of adversarial. The modern world was in the grasp of the devil, Satan. It was full of all sorts of evil things and negativity. But the bishops want to kind of change that viewpoint and have a more positive, because it's probably more positive, better, I should say, to state your views positively. You can get people to agree with you or understand your opinion if you try to express it more positively than if you just give a negative view. Explain to people why they should do something rather than just say, don't do it, or it's wrong. Now, where does Gaudium et Spes come in? Well, because the document was written in Latin, that's the official language of the church. They still write some documents in Latin. It just makes it easier for translation purposes to have a universal language. I wish it weren't Latin, because Latin is complicated if anyone's ever tried to learn Latin, but it's not a particularly easy language to learn. But they take the first two words of the documents and you'll use that as a shorthand. So instead of having to constantly say the pastoral constitution on the church in the modern world, you say Gaudium et Spes, which are the opening words in Latin of the document. Joy and hope, the joys and the hopes of the world, the sufferings and sorrows are shared by the church. That was it opens. So what does it say? The root reason for human dignity lies in man's call to communion with God. Okay, so there's a purpose why a human being has dignity. It's not for nothing that God gave this dignity to the human person, because God wants the human person for himself. Wants the human person to be in relationship. And so that's what everything is about. That's the whole purpose of human life, of the whole created world. It's to encourage communion with God. So from the very circumstance of his origin, man is already invited to converse with God, which we call prayer. It's conversation with God, talking to God. Go back over to my notes here. For man would not exist were he not created by God's love and constantly preserved by it. And he cannot live fully according to truth unless he freely acknowledges that love and devotes himself to his Creator. So it's a relationship of love. So why did God create the human person? It was freely done. God didn't have to do it. So it comes out of his goodness and his love. Certainly not hate. God doesn't hate his creation. Otherwise, why would he make it? It would be counterintuitive. And so the response to God is one of love. And that's what's going on in Catholic healthcare. It's our response to God's love for us. As God has loved me, I show love to my neighbor by caring for my neighbor when he or she is sick and suffering. So man has always been intended to be in a close, unified relationship with God. Communion and conversation. Closer, be in union with God. And that's what we call heaven. Heaven is just a religious term. You could use any other word you want. You could call it communion if you want. But that's basically what heaven is to be in complete union with God. To be in his presence is another way of putting that. Human beings exist because God wants them to exist, which is another way of saying that God loves mankind. God loves men and women. He wants us to exist. He wants us to be in relationship with each other, but also with him, but also with each other. And that's what's going on. Healthcare is a relationship. You as a nurse, as a physician, as a radiologist, as a social worker, physical therapist, whatever, what have you, even a businessman, you are entering into relationships with other human people. And you bring that relationship of hopefully bring your relationship with God to that relationship with the other person. The response to man's dignity, human dignity, is devotion to pursuing and doing God's will for himself and for creation. So that's why it matters how God, I didn't make the rules. The church didn't make the rules. The belief is God made the rules. And now, how do we come to know those rules? Well, that's another question. We come to know those rules through revelation, if God reveals them to us directly or indirectly and says, this is how I want human life to be. But we also can know them through human reason. People, who are not Christian or not Christian can use their human reason and see that there are certain values, certain goods of the human person that exist at all times and all places and should be for everyone. Okay? So it's a question of how do we know God's will for himself? We have to kind of reason and make up our minds and use our consciences to determine what those are. And hope we can also use the guidance of the church. But once we've come to a decision, we respond to that, and it's also part of our dignity of responding to God's will for us, and as we see it. You, in some way, because you want to be a nurse, you want to be a healing professional, in some way you could say you are responding to God's will for you. It's God's will that you be. There's something about you your care, your concern, your passion for people who are suffering, that God sees in you that can be used as part of your dignity and will be used in healthcare. It's part of your devotion to God. The U.S. Catholic bishops wrote a pastoral letter. Again, this word pastoral, I didn't realize the word pastoral would come up so often in the course, but in of course today. But again, a shepherding letter, a letter to American Catholics. This was back in 1981. They wrote a pastoral letter called Health and Healthcare. And yes, it's called, at that time, they were called the National Conference of Catholic Bishops. They're now called the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. They just changed their name maybe 20 years ago or so. But they made, in this statement, they talked about the same kind of idea. Because all human beings are created according to God's image, they possess a basic human dignity which calls for the utmost reverence. On the individual level, this means a special responsibility to care for one's own health and that of others. Because I mentioned self-care before. It's because of, I have an individual obligation to take care of my health. But there's also a social obligation. The societal level calls for the responsibility of society to provide adequate health care, which is a basic human right. Okay, so it's not an add-on, and that's something that we struggle with in this country, because it's still, I think, for a lot of I think the view in this country has been that healthcare is kind of an add-on. It's something you get as a benefit to your job. Okay, it's not something that is due you based on your human dignity, but that's how the Catholic bishops view it. Healthcare is so important for full human dignity and so necessary for the proper development of life that it's a fundamental right of every human being. Okay? Now, how do we put that fundamental right into practice is another question. Okay, there might be various ways. It might not be a universal system like they have in some countries. There might be different ways of doing it. Just in Brian Cain's book, The Blessing of Life, the textbook, he has a whole chapter devoted to healthcare systems, and he talks about 3 different versions of how healthcare can be delivered to people, which doesn't necessarily have to be a top-down government healthcare system, but there has to be something that a society provides, and it has to be for everyone, because everyone as a human being has that human dignity. And to live it stands to reason, to fully live your life, you're going to need healthcare at some point in time. You're going to need the alleviation of suffering or the treatment of an illness. You can't do it on your own. And your family can't do it. It's not like 100 years ago or 200 years ago, where a lot of the burdens would be placed on a family. And even it's at the point where healthcare is so expensive that most people can't do it. You can't even afford it. Even people who are middle class, if you need an operation and the operation costs $100,000, that's what do? You forego the healthcare. You have to make that choice. Or if you have medication that you're supposed to be taking, but it's hundreds of dollars, unless of course you have copay or you do have insurance. Even with insurance, sometimes the copay can be an expensive amount, and if you're on like a fixed income or something, like you're an elderly person, you have to decide: do I forego the medication? So these are issues, but this is foregoing what should be a basic fundamental right. The person shouldn't have to make that decision because they have a value and a worth that comes from God. They should be taken care of in their health. So based on your human dignity, a person has a moral obligation, as I said already, to care for his or her health. And this is not done purely autonomously. Okay, we talked about ethical principalism. And one of the main points of ethical principalism, one of the first points, is that the patient is autonomous. But from a Catholic vision, you have to qualify that autonomy. We are not autonomous individuals. We exist in community. Okay, we should take care of ourselves. We have a moral responsibility to do that, but we don't do it alone. If I get sick, I get well, I get better in collaboration with a medical team. All right, that's the emphasis now. And this is, if you ever do your interviews for medical school or for nursing school, what's one of the main buzzwords that you want to use, that you're part of a medical team. It's not just you making the decisions on your lonesome autonomously, that you are a team, including the patient. Okay, it should include the patient as part of that team in making the decisions. But you don't want to overemphasize autonomy to the point where the patient makes all the decisions, because the patient doesn't have all the knowledge and expertise that you will have as a medical professional, as a healing professional. So you do have a moral obligation to care for your health, but the relationship of caring for your health is reciprocal with your healthcare providers. You are respecting their dignity also by availing yourself and trusting in their expertise. So there is a relationship of trusting the nurse, trusting the doctor, and what they're doing to you. That doesn't mean you still don't have to give your informed consent and whatnot. Those are still principles, yes, but it does mean that you can see the worth, you acknowledge the worth and value of the healing professional who's there. And based on human dignity, society owes me resources to achieve health and wholeness. And society owes me to care for me when I'm sick and vulnerable. And so that's why the bishops say this is basic and fundamental. This is basic to who the human person is. The human person is not a consumer. And that's often how, in ethical situations, that can be how a patient is seen, as a consumer. So, a doctor sometimes might prescribe certain medicines, not because it's necessarily in the best interest of the patient, but because there's an incentive to try out new medications. A person comes in from a drug company and says, hey, we have this, this, and this. How about trying it out and prescribing it on your patients? And they get a kickback sometimes from the pharmaceutical company, or some sort of benefits, some sort of, they send them they'll pay for them to go to a conference or something like that. There's a term for that, and I forget what the term for it was. I forget what it's called. Anyways, I read it recently in a book, but this can be a practice where the patient then is seen more as a consumer than as a patient. It's not the person to be treated, but a person, okay, I can try out these drugs, or I can get a benefit if I can see I'm in a consortium of physicians and I have to see X amount of patients to be profitable. So again, you're not dealing with the patient as a human being, you're dealing with the patient as, okay, these are the certain numbers of patients that I have to see during a day in order for it to be profitable to the larger group of doctors and that I'm part of. Again, according to Margaret Hogan, who I mentioned before, an ethicist at the University of Portland, maintaining life is the fundamental principle of Catholic medical ethics. And I think you could say that that's probably the principle that you'll find even in a secular ethic. Your hospital's there to maintain people's life, to try to promote life, although not always. Sometimes you might be in a situation where there's an ethical decision of, are you going to end a life? And that's a different question. Application of this precept, meaning the maintenance of life, is central to Catholic medical ethics, and it's controlling for issues at the beginning and the end of life. So again, abortifacient technologies, directly aborting a fetus, for example, is the destruction of a life. It's a living being, and it's a human living being, which makes it even, say, worse from the eyes of the Catholic perspective, because it's a creature that's been made in the image and likeness of God. So the respect for life, or the maintenance of life, is controlling. also at the end of life. So directly killing someone or directly causing their death is again something that would be opposed by a Catholic ethic of life. But that doesn't mean that it's an absolute value. For example, if a person is in the stages of dying, it is ethical to let a person die because that's a natural stage of human existence. Directly causing it is not natural. That's another thing. You also might have issues of where a person is suffering and they might be dying as well, but they might be suffering from something and you give them morphine, which is okay it's for pain relief, but morphine can also have the side effect of depressing lung function. So you have to be really careful that you don't give them too much morphine because it can stop them from breathing. The lungs stop functioning and they suffocate to death. Now there's a different that's a side effect of morphine. You could be aggravating, especially if a person is in a frail state and they are already dying. You could be, by prescribing morphine for their pain, hastening their death, but not intentionally. Your intention is to take care of their pain. Okay, so that's an end of life issue, an ethical issue that you might have to consider. To what ethical extent can I give a painkiller if I know that it might hasten the death of the person? If it's not your intention to hasten the death, it's probably ethical. If your main concern it's not your direct intention. If your main concern is to relieve pain, then it probably is ethical. But again, the main concern, why is it an ethical question? Because it's the maintenance of life. You want this person to be alive as long as naturally possible until it's time to go. Life is a good. Now life is a good. We had the definition of the good before, so I just mention it again. This is the same definition. The good, which I talked about way back when, the name for something which ultimately benefits the human person, but it can be used in a different way. In philosophy, they'll talk about goods of the human person, or the goods of life. What is a good of life or a good of something? What does that mean philosophically speaking? A good is something which is a perfection. It is something which perfects or makes better one's nature. Okay? So in the case of life, I can just give you some examples, like community. Being alone is not necessarily a good. We're social beings. We're born into societies. We're born into families. Okay, even if a person is born just to a mother, into a single family home, you're still born to another person. From our existence, we live in society. The baby in the womb within the mother is already a basic form of society. The baby interacts with the mother, hears the mother's voice, can touch the mother, moves around in the mother's body, etc., and so forth. And then after birth, that society becomes even more active. Okay, you talk to each other, you touch each other. So we're social beings just by our nature and by just how we are, maybe just how we've evolved, you could say. So that's a good. It's a perfection of our human nature. Can you be alone in other times to be alone? Yes. But being alone all the time is not necessarily a good, unless for certain reasons. Sometimes people have to be alone. Sometimes people choose to be alone. Hermits. But oftentimes they're crazy. I remember one guy who lived in a community of hermits, I think up in New Hampshire, Christian hermits, they're monks, and spend most of their time living in various rooms, and then they come out for some community activities. And the joke was that, by living in the hermitage, everyone living alone, you either become a saint or you become a devil. You either go to one or two extremes. You either become a very holy person, or you're just, because you're living alone and hopefully you're praying to God, because that's their job, they're monks. But you can also be living alone and become very selfish and self-centered, and you become a devil. So But even these hermits living up in their hermitage, these monks recognize that they need to come out like once a week to be with each other. There's a social aspect to their humanity that's a good, that's a perfection that needs to be cultivated. Okay, life, or you could say existence, is a good. It is better to be alive and to exist than not to exist. I assume that's obvious. Okay, I mean, just, look at the reaction when someone dies. People think that, oh, the person doesn't exist anymore. If the person doesn't have a belief in an afterlife, or even if you do have a belief in an afterlife, when someone dies and the person is no more, they're not in the state that you knew them, they're gone, something's gone, people cry, people feel grief. We have a natural reaction to the non-existence of life. We see it as a good, a perfection. It's better to be alive than to be dead, to exist than to not exist. But there are other goods of human life. Love is a good. Having a loving relationship with people, relationships themselves. Pleasure is a good. Pleasure is a good thing. Procreation is a good. Making more life. Procreation is a good. And these are all predicated on this simple fact, that they are goods of human existence. Again, Margaret Hogan. If you want to see her lecture, I give the reference at the bottom there. She has a lecture on YouTube that I watched and I thought it was pretty good, so I used some pieces from it. For Judaism and Christianity, life is a gift from God. I've already mentioned this, so I don't need to beat a dead horse. Life is given from God. The human person is created in the image of God, and the human person is given stewardship, a responsibility over these gifts of God. So that's also part of healthcare. You as a nurse, as a physician, you have a stewardship over your patients and the people who come to you. What does it mean to say that life is sacred or holy? What does that mean? The sanctity of human life, the holiness, another word for holiness. Well, basically, holiness is anything that's dedicated to a supernatural being, something that's sacred. The sacred is a sense of ultimate, you could call it ultimate reality if you don't want to use the word for God, some kind of ultimate reality, some kind of ultimate force or principle of the universe that has ordered everything and moves everything, you could say that. But nevertheless, the human beings in their history have noticed or felt this kind of a presence of an ultimate reality in their life, and they reach out to it. They want to respond to it. Okay, you see this in the humankind's religions. Okay, and if you take an evolutionary view of human religion, you might say, well, that's all it is. It's people responding to a feeling they have of otherness. There's some otherness that we see in the universe. Okay, that we give ultimate, eternal, transcendent meaning to. And then things might become attached to this otherness, to this ultimate reality. Certain things, sex, so you have taboos, you have you have certain rules, all sorts of rules and cultures around the sexual act, because it's seen as sacred, it's seen as something dedicated to the gods. Or certain areas, like certain places in forests, for example, you might build buildings that are dedicated to the gods. They become holy. They're not normal. They're not normal space. They're outside of normal space. There are things that you do or should do in a church. Of course, people don't think this way anymore. People have kind of lost a sense of this sacredness. But there are things that you would do or not do in a church or a mosque or a synagogue that you could certainly do normally in everyday activity. Wear a hat, okay? Or you have to wear a hat. Like if you go to a synagogue and you're a man, you have to wear a cap on you have to wear the kippah, you have the yarmulke on your head. If you're a woman and you're a Muslim and you're a woman, or any woman, if you go into a mosque, then you have to cover your head with a veil. You also have to take your shoes off if you're a man or a woman. These are customs, but they're sacred customs which are meant to indicate that the place that you're entering is dedicated to a supernatural being. we have, we have this even in the secular world. For example, has anyone ever gone to Washington to the tomb of the unknown soldier? Yeah. What happened there?
Like, what's it, a memorial to?
Yeah, what did you have to do? Did you have to do anything, or did
I just remember kind of like walking through it.
walking through it?
I don't remember doing anything in particular.
Did you watch the changing of the guard and all that, or
No, we just kind of walked by it.
just walk by it?
Mhm.
Has anyone else been there? Or never gone to Washington, D.C.? But you know the tomb of the unknown soldier, right? They've got the soldier, they've got a guy there who, with a gun, of course, a rifle, who is protecting the tomb, and walks back and forth. And then they have the changing of the guard, and you can go there and see the changing of the guard. I mean, you can watch this if you want to go on YouTube, but maybe I should have shown that. I wonder if no, I don't. But, you cannot, except for the soldier who is guarding the tomb of the unknown soldier, no one else can walk there. If people try to, and people do, they try to go over the barrier, the soldier will stop and say, "Please stand behind the barrier." And then we'll go back to walking. If you can't laugh. If they hear you, guy hears you laughing, what does he say? How does he say it? He says, "We require an attitude of respect." And he goes back.
I think he laughs when he gets back home, like after he says that, or
No, from what I've seen on YouTube, the guys who do it are deadly serious. You can't walk. The civilians, the people who are there, the crowds, are not allowed to walk on the area around the tomb. You're not allowed to laugh. I don't know if you're allowed to talk loud as well. But there are places you can't go. It's a sacred space. It's the same thing, even though it's not religious. It's a sacred space. It's not dedicated to a supernatural being per se, but it's kind of a secular version, a non-religious version of a sacred space. That it's dedicated to a certain purpose, which is considered so important that you have to act a certain way in it. So at its most basic level, to be sacred or holy or sanctified means to be set apart for use in regards to a god or a spirit. In other words, for a specific religious purpose or reason. And so the sacred object is then separated from normal everyday use. Human life is sacred. Okay, so the church uses religious language. Why? Because it comes from a supernatural source, God. So that's why it's kind of a logical extension of the dignity of the human person. Now, other ethicists and philosophers wouldn't talk that way. They would talk about the dignity of the human person or the value of human life. They probably wouldn't talk about the sacredness of human life, because, especially if they're non-religious philosophers or ethicists, because they probably don't believe that, it comes from God, if they're atheists or something. But human life is sacred because human life originates in a sacred being who is God himself, who imparts his life to the human being. That's what God is, basically. God is the source of all existence. We use the word God. You could use any other word. But for a definition of God, God is basically the good source of all existence, of everything that is a perfection. And existence is a perfection, to exist. So he's the source of existence. So life, which is existence, another word for existence, derives ultimately from him for everything, but especially in a special way for human life. I have some more to say about that, but I think I'll say it next week when we come back. So have a good weekend and have a good break, and I'll see you next Thursday. Yes, sir.
I my quiz. I don't know if you saw it.
Oh, I didn't look. I
just wanted to know I turned it in.
Okay, good. Thank you. It didn't give you any trouble then.
Nope, all good.
Good.
All right, have a good one.
You too. Thank you, sir.
Sorry.
Oh, Ms. Weir, could I?
Yeah, like, wait, I feel like, I can do the same thing over and over.
Whoops, let me turn this off.